Welcome to the Performing Arts Series brought to you by the Kennedy Center and the Prince William Network. My name is Maria Salvador, your moderator for today's program. Before we begin, I want to remind you that this program is interactive and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of us later in the broadcast by using the 800 number or the email address appearing on your screen. My co-hosts for today's discussion are Darren Montgomery and Nathan Kratchner from Lake Ridge Middle School in Woodbridge, Virginia. With me is noted author Jon Scieszka, whose work has delighted readers and subversives of many ages. Jon has received many prizes and numerous accolades. His books have been dubbed notable by the American Library Association, as well as best books by the New York Times and Publishers Weekly. And the True Story of the Three Little Pigs has won a Publishers Weekly Cuffy Award for the funniest book of the year and most engaging character in a lead role, non-bunny, non-dinosaur. In addition to discussing his Caldecott Honor book, The Stinky Cheese Man, the Timewarp Trio series, and other books he's written, we'll have a chance to find out what Mr. Scieszka is currently working on and maybe gain insight into how he came to tell stories. Welcome, Jon Scieszka.
Thanks, Maria. Glad to be here.
Well, you were born and raised in Flint, Michigan, and your parents were educators. How did your early experiences influence your future career?
I think the biggest influence was probably growing up with this pack of 5 brothers. We're a family of 6 boys, no girls, and it was just kind of a raucous household. Though my dad was an elementary school principal, so he sort of knew how to run a group, and we definitely were run as a group. And then my mom was a registered nurse, so she could patch us up. I learned how to take care of cuts and wounds early on, which was good for the little brothers. But I think honestly my sense of humor came from being at the dinner table and having to kind of find a way to define myself there. Like my brother Jim could talk really fast. He became a lawyer. And then I was funny. I would tell a joke and then I could grab the piece of chicken while everybody was laughing. So I got fed well too that way. That's a good trick to know.
Did you and your brothers ever play imaginary games that inspired your writing?
Yeah, you know what? I think a lot of my writing, and in fact, some of the Timewarp stuff comes out of having played a lot, because that's what we did. I definitely remember like playing with my older brother Jim, who's just a year older than me, or we would run around the neighborhood. So some of the games we would play, like I think our favorite game was Dirt Clod Wars, which wasn't so imaginary. We would actually have like war games where we'd divide up into 2 armies and then just throw dirt clods at each other. Or build forts.
Fun, out of snow.
Yeah. Actually, we would do like snow forts and igloos, because I grew up in Michigan, so there was plenty of snow to be packing around. And then snowballs are great for having wars too.
Yeah.
Less hurtful.
Yeah, I guess the rocks, were a little harder than the snow.
Yeah.
Well, dirt clods tend to disintegrate on impact.
Oh, they make a great poof, though, when they hit somebody. They just go like, poof. And that's how we'd chase away our little brothers, too, who tried to tag along with us. We'd say, like, okay, Greg, you run. And then we'd try to hit him. And then he'd say, I don't want to play anymore. So he wouldn't play anymore.
Have you ever pranked any of your brothers?
Oh, yeah. In fact, we lived for pranks, too. Because I was the second oldest in our family. And so my older brother and I got to prank all the little guys all the time. Like one of our favorite ones was just to scare them. Like if you put a flashlight under your face at night and it lights you from below, it looks really spooky. So we would just like lean over Tom's bed and wake him up and go like, and he would scream. And then my mom would say, what happened? What happened? We go, we don't know. Tom just started screaming. I don't know what he was doing. And then we got more elaborate later. Like Jim and I figured out, have you ever seen those spray things in the kitchen? Like you can spray the dishes? Yes. If you tape that with black electrical tape and then put it back in there, when someone turns on the water, the spray comes jetting out. So unfortunately, we pranked my mom on that one because she was the one who turned the water on.
Oh, you
It's
that?
like, oops.
I bet she wasn't happy.
No, but the other one she didn't like even more was when we saran wrapped the toilet. So if you put a nice layer of saran wrap over the top of the porcelain part, you can't really see it. But so when someone goes to the bathroom, it just all falls on the floor. We thought it was funny. My mom definitely didn't think it was
No,
funny.
I wouldn't think
With
so.
6 boys, it's like, oops.
Not a good thing.
Yeah, so we played plenty of pranks.
Speaking of brothers, you write about brothers in a short story in Guys Write for Guys Read. Do you mind sharing that?
Oh, I would love to. This is one of the kind of classic Scieszka family tales. In fact, this is kind of what happened a lot, because we would travel around, like my dad had a station wagon, and he would just throw all of us in there. That's a lot of people to cram in a car. And here's what happens sometimes.
I hope not often.
Well, more often than you might imagine.
Excuse me.
But of all the Scieszka brother memories, I believe it was a family car trip that gave us our finest moment of brotherhood. We were driving cross country from Michigan to Florida, all of us, including the family cat, who was also a guy cat, naturally, in the family station wagon. Somewhere mid-trip, we stopped at one of those Stucky restaurants to eat and load up on Stucky's candy. So we ate lunch, ran around like maniacs, then packed up into the station wagon. Mom and Dad in the front, and then Jim, John, Tom, Greg, Brian, and Jeff, and the cat in the back. Somebody dropped his Stucky's pecan log roll on the floor. The cat found it and must have scarfed every bit of it, because 2 minutes later, we heard that awful sound of a cat getting ready to barf. Well, that's exactly what happened. The cat puked up the pecan nut log, and Jeff, since he was the youngest and the smallest and closest to the floor, was the first one to go. He got one look and one whiff of that pecan nut cat yak and blew his own sticky lunch back all over the cat. The puke-covered cat then jumped on Brian. Brian barfed on Greg. Greg upchucked on Tom. Tom burped a little bit of the Stucky lunch back on Greg, and Jim and I rolled down the windows and hung out as far as we could, yelling in puke horror. Now, my dad, Lou, didn't know what had hit the back of the car. He didn't have any time to ask questions, so he just pulled off the side of the road. And all of the brothers, Jim, John, Tom, Greg, Brian, and Jeff, spilled out of the puke wagon and fell in the grass, gagging and yelling and laughing till we couldn't laugh anymore. So, what does this all mean? What is the essential guy wisdom you can learn from this? It's stick with your brothers, stick up for your brothers, and if you ever drop a pecan nut log in a car with 5 brothers and your cat, you will probably stick to your brothers.
Certainly is a memorable story, and it's a different take on a family story. It's not your traditional family story, really, is it?
Well, I thought it was kind of heartwarming in
Yeah,
a
it's
disgusting way.
Amazing, just amazing. But you know, it does have elements of a traditional folk tale. It's short, it's cumulative,
Yeah.
and it comes to a speedy resolution. How does your knowledge of more traditional tales influence your writing?
You know, that's actually very interesting. I had never thought of that tale in particular as a folk tale, but now that you mention those elements, that's exactly what makes a great fable or a folk tale. And that's what I really love to use as my raw material. I mean, my stuff is The True Story of the Three Little Pigs, or Stinky Cheese Man, which kind of messes with a lot of fairy tales, or The Frog Prince Continued, which is the story after they lived all happily ever after, not so happily. But I think that's where I started. I really liked how goofy fairy tales and fables were. So I think what happened is I read so many of those, that just became the way I told stories.
Interesting.
Also part of the oral tradition, you know what? And I think that's what children's books are, where it's stories where you actually tell to kids, like your mom reads to you, or your aunt, or your grandmother. And too often you don't get to read aloud. It's like when adults don't usually read aloud to each other. But I love reading to a group of kids, because then you get a great reaction. And it's fun to have an audience, like someone to give a laugh when you're making a funny story. Because there's nothing worse than telling a funny story and then someone just goes oh. Like they didn't get the joke. So much better to have.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, was that supposed to be funny?
Was I supposed to laugh?
Yeah. So that's I think that's what the oral tradition really is, and folk tales came out of that, of someone performing and really telling stories to people.
And family stories can become part of
Yeah,
the oral
you know what?
tradition.
That's a perfect example of family stories. And then you get your own sort of family stories. Like some of the stories you were telling us before of your family, of like what went on. I'm sure you can tell those. You'll be telling those to your children.
Yeah.
And then they'll be going like, wow, this is one my dad told me.
It's true.
Or they become like family jokes, like some of the jokes. I'm sure your grandmother will be telling stories. Well, I don't know, she might not tell that one, but.
Oh, yeah.
She might not.
Yeah, and like little like pranks you play on your sisters or your brothers. And then it's kind of stuff you all share and you remember those stories.
It's kind of like sharing a book. You
Yeah.
share a story, and you always know what you're talking about.
And then in families, I noticed you kind of add to them and you start changing them a little bit. You got to make them sound a little better, maybe add some details. I don't know. Or then you kind of do what a good writer does. You get rid of pieces too. Like if you tell a story that doesn't quite work and you notice like people are looking at you kind of weird. And so you just, maybe the next time you tell it, you kind of leave out that one long part you had. And then you cut right to the funny part.
And make everybody laugh.
Yeah, and exactly like that story you were telling about your dad, and just going, people go, whoop.
It's true.
Why did you decide to tell the story of the three little pigs from the wolf's perspective?
Oh, that's a perfect example of this kind of stuff, where that's what happened in our house all the time. Like I remember one time my brother Jim and I were wrestling around in the living room. Oh, that was another game we did a lot. We wrestled. I don't know if that's really a game. It's just like a mad bunch of wrestling. But when we were wrestling, we broke the couch. Like the front legs fell off. They just went poof. So we went, oh man, we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
So who got in trouble for that?
Well, so we put the legs back on, just kind of like gently put them there
And then when somebody said,
and set them up and hoping we'd sneak out. But then my mom came in and saw us doing it, and she said, what happened there? What's going on?
we
And
did WWF.
my brother Jim said, he said, no, don't worry, I'll tell the story. And so I kind of trusted him. I said, oh, okay. And he said, well, John did it. That was like the whole explanation. I went, no, wait a minute. And then so ever after that, I would tell the story of like what happened, and I would just say like, oh no, Tom did it. Or Tom would say, no, Greg did it. So I think that's what the Three Little Pigs became. That's just the wolf going.
Well, fill us in a little bit on the story of the Three Little Pigs. Everybody may
Oh
not
yeah,
know
that's
the
true. I
stories.
mean, people know the wrong version. They just know the story the pigs told. They don't know the story that Al Wolf told. Like he wanted to borrow a cup of sugar for his granny's birthday cake. And because he ran out of sugar, so he went to the pigs, asked them to borrow a cup of sugar, and they were nasty. So he just happened to sneeze down a couple houses, eat a few pigs, and it was a media frame-up.
Yeah. What can you say?
Kind of like Brother Jim framing me, Innocent John. And you guys know I'm innocent, right?
I'm innocent?
sometimes.
Sometimes.
The Stinky Cheese Man and Other Fairly Stupid Tales reinvents even more familiar tales and practically reinvents the book. Why did you change where everything is in the standard book?
Oh, I love doing that. It was kind of because we started, like I messed up one fairy tale with the Three Little Pigs, and then I wrote The Frog Prince, where I kind of went after the fairy tale is over. The book actually starts with the end. And then I thought, oh, wouldn't that be fun to mess up an entire book? So everything's messed up, like the introduction, the table of contents. Like you said, the end paper comes in the middle. But I also realized, because I taught school for 10 years, elementary school, and I found my guys, like my second and third graders, they really liked it when you broke rules. So I thought it'd be more fun to break all the rules. So every book rule I could possibly think of, we broke. We actually wanted to print the thing upside down. We were going to print the whole book, so like when you open it. But our editor said, you know what, people are going to be really mad. Yeah, and they're going to write in.
Yeah, I think you'd get too many returns from bookstores and libraries.
We had one other great idea that didn't make it in there too. In that story where it's the hare and the tortoise, it's actually a piece of hair racing the tortoise. And we were going to have that be a pop-up, so the hair would pop up. But you know how those pop-up books always break. So we were going to have a little thing glued on that says pull tab A, and when you pull it, it would just come off the book. And nothing would happen. It would just go like, ha-ha. Maybe even write that on the tab. Yeah. Though we did figure maybe little kids might start crying, so we didn't want to.
I think that might not be so great. But for those people who aren't familiar with it, do you want to read the introduction and then maybe a story out of there?
That's a good idea. Yeah, because we sort of have Jack the narrator running everything. He introduces the book. He shows us the title page.
Yeah. You have to know that's the title page. Title
Well,
page is
Lane
the
got to
first.
take a day off, my illustrator. He didn't have to work too hard on that page. And then Jack, we did get one page upside down, the dedication page. But Jack says, yeah, I know it's upside down. We're having some problems here. So Jack writes the introduction to explain what you're going to get in this book. Introduction. A long time ago, people used to tell magical stories of wonder and enchantment. Those stories were called fairy tales. Those stories are not in this book. The stories in this book are almost fairy tales, but not quite. The stories in this book are fairly stupid tales. I mean, who else would call a story like Goldilocks and the Three Elephants? This girl's walking through the woods. She smells some peanut porridge cooking. She decides to break into the elephant's house, eat the porridge, sit in the chairs, and sleep in the beds. But when she gets in the house, she can't climb up on baby elephant's chair because it's too big. She can't climb up on mama elephant's chair because it's much too big. And she can't climb up on papa elephant's chair because guess what? It's much, much too big. So she goes home. The end. Now, if you don't think that's fairly stupid, you should go read Little Red Running Shorts, or maybe The Stinky Cheese Man. In fact, you should definitely go read those stories now, because the rest of this introduction just kind of goes on and doesn't really say anything. I just stuck it on the end here so it would fill up the page and make it look like I really knew what I was talking about. So stop now. I mean it. Quit reading. Turn the page. If you read this last sentence, it won't tell you anything. Signed, Jack. Isn't that lovely?
I think that's wonderful. Kind of gives you a heads up as to the whole tone of the book.
It lets you know what's coming, exactly.
Yeah.
It was also a good way to sort of stick in a couple fairy tales that we couldn't fit in the
Yeah.
book, like that elephant one.
I like
We
that a
just
lot.
didn't have enough room, so I thought, oh, Jack can tell the whole thing.
Are you going to read another story for us out of this collection?
Why, now that you asked, I would love to. This is one of my personal favorites just because it's so heartwarming. And I know you'll think this is heartwarming, Dan, because this is your kind of heartwarming. And it's called The Really Ugly Duckling. And he looks so nice. And I love actually working with somebody like Lane Smith, the illustrator, because he comes up with this great idea, like he puts all these ducks on the outside, which he just collaged from somewhere else, so they look kind of normal. And this guy just looks like he's from somewhere else, with the drool hanging off his beak.
Yeah, and the weird eyes.
And the weird eyes, yeah, like coming out of his head. So once upon a time, there was a mother duck and a father duck who had 7 baby ducklings. 6 of them were regular-looking ducklings. The 7th was a really ugly duckling. Everyone used to say, "What a nice-looking bunch of ducklings." All except that one. Man, he is really ugly. Now, the really ugly duckling heard these people, but he didn't care. He knew that one day he would grow up to be a swan, and he would be bigger and look better than anybody in the pond. Well, as it turned out, he was just a really ugly duckling, and he grew up to be just a really ugly duck. The end.
That's funny.
Which actually, I figured out how to put the end on all of these because I read the book to my son when he was in kindergarten and his whole kindergarten class. And when I read this story, they all looked at me like, what? Like, what just happened? So I had to say the end to kind of wake them all up and say, like, now the story's over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, now we can go.
Nathan and I, we like the Time Warp Trio a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Are Joe, Sam, and Fred anything like you and your brothers?
That's a great question. Do we have a Time Warp laying
do.
around here? Yeah, because the Time Warps, for the people who haven't read them, are books about 3 guys, Joe, Sam, and Fred, who can travel anywhere in time. They get a magic book from their Uncle Joe, and unfortunately they don't know how the book works, so it just takes them places. And because they are probably boys, they're not going to read the instructions anyhow. They just keep trying to use it. So they go everywhere. And that's exactly how I first thought of it. I thought of like, what would happen if, like, my brother and I just went somewhere with one of our friends? Like, what would we do if we met up with someone like King Arthur? Or what if we met up with Da Vinci or Marco Polo? And also, it came from like teaching kids when I taught like 4th, 5th grade. And I just thought, I'd read some of those books where the kids just didn't seem real. Have you ever read one of those where it seems like when the kids are talking, it's just like, who would ever talk like that?
Yes.
So I just wanted to have like normal kids in here. Like, what would a normal kid do who was in like a really weird situation? Like, what would you guys do if you ran into some robot in the future? Or what would you do if you saw like a dragon and a giant? And you probably would just go like, oh, what the heck is that?
I take a rope and strap it around the dragon.
See, you'd be a perfect kind of like time warp guy. You're just like
I'd insert pie into the robot.
perfect and just blow his circuits. Yeah, so you guys are like what Fred would do, which would like take some action, or like Sam, like think of something smart to get out of the problem. Exactly.
Seems like Sam's the one who's the nerd in the book.
Yeah, but you know what? He's the nerd, and he's always like the most nervous guy too. He just thinks, "Oh, this is going to end bad." Yeah, this is a bad idea. Would be something Sam would always say.
And then Fred's like, "No, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Just
Yep.
let's go."
Yep, and it's like, and I made Fred sort of like, kind of like myself, and kind of like one guy I knew who was always just this like go do something guy. He would just say, "Well, yeah, let's just attack the dragon, or let's just take on the giant, or let's find something to eat." Fred always wants to find something to eat, too.
He's always hungry.
Yep. And so the narrator, Joe, is probably most like me, because I kind of write the books from his point of view, and he's thinking about like, oh man, we got to find the book to get out of here, or we're going to be here forever. So I tried to make them real is probably the best answer to that.
It kind of reminds me of Jimmy Neutron.
Yeah, yeah, I like that too. You know what, and a lot of these books come out of like cartoons I watched as a kid too. Because when I grew up, I loved watching Rocky and Bullwinkle and the Bugs Bunny cartoons. And I don't know, and that's kind of how these books work too, like with cliffhanger endings.
Okay. Do you have a favorite, you guys?
Mine is 2095.
And mine was
Nice.
Your Mother Was a Neanderthal.
Oh, those are a couple of my favorites too.
In the Time Warp Trio books, the boys find the book, which is like their little traveling book,
Yeah.
and travel forward, backward, and all through time. Did you ever think of telling 2095 from a Cellbot's perspective?
No, but that would be interesting. Like that's the robot just selling stuff. He would probably just say, buy this now, buy this.
What made you decide to go to the future?
You know what? It's kind of something I wanted to do after doing the past. I thought it'd be more fun to go forward, and then I could just imagine what might happen, and really exaggerate stuff too.
Oh, I'm sure you did.
Well, yes, like advertising, which I thought were kind of little things. What if there was a robot who always followed you around and tried to make you buy
Pretty
stuff?
creepy.
Yeah, exactly. And they like knew you and knew what you wanted.
And your 3 daughters chasing you all around the city.
Very spooky, especially when you didn't even know you had great-granddaughters. Yee.
How did you manage to make each chapter in the book like a cliffhanger, like in Your Mother Was a Neanderthal?
Oh yeah, you know what? That was like an idea I had for the books. All of these books have short chapters, and I wanted to make them with some real action to them. And that's more fun for me to write too. So like when I'm writing, I usually write these like a chapter at a time, so I can think, where do I want them to get to next? And I think it comes from watching a lot of cartoons. Because you know how like they always run up to like something crazy is gonna happen, and then they go
To a commercial.
Yep, commercial break.
I hate that.
I don't like that.
I hate that.
But I thought I could do that version. You can actually just flip the page, then you don't have to wait for the
You're like,
commercial.
okay,
Yeah.
next one.
Yeah, and then you start going.
It's like it makes you want to read the next chapter. It's like, oh, this book is going to be boring
Yeah,
at first, and then you
yeah.
read the first chapter, it's like, what's going to happen next? It's
Yeah.
like going over and over again. It's like, wow.
And that's what you want to do as an author. You want to like capture people. You don't want them like going, oh man, this guy's just going on about describing stuff. You want to go, oh no, they're hanging from a tree. What's going to happen here? And keep them reading.
How would the story change if you told it from one of the cave girls?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that would be a lot different. The cave girls would probably just be making fun of the guys, thinking like, who are these stupid guys who came from who knows where?
falling for the dinosaur head.
Yeah, falling for the pranks. But you know what? Then eventually I bet the girls probably might actually kind of appreciate the time warp and realize, like, oh, these guys did something good. They saved us. But they'd probably still think they were smarter.
Yeah.
Well, you imagine the future, you travel to the unknown past, but you also visit lots of known periods in history. Galileo,
Oh, yeah.
you meet the Vikings. What kind of research do these books require?
Oh, they're actually a ton of research. But that's kind of the fun part of these books, when I can go back in history. And that's the hard part, too, is to find that one moment in history. Like in Hey Kid, You Want to Buy a Bridge? They go back when the Brooklyn Bridge was just being built, where I live. And that thing's been around for like 100, 120 years now. But at that moment, Thomas Edison, the guy who invented the light bulb, was also living in New York. So I tried to like put all those things together and find that one moment when everyone would be there. So it's real history. It just happens to have like the time warp in the middle of that.
It's kind of neat. In most, probably all of the Time Warp Trio books, you make plugs for other books. You know, everything from H.G. Wells to Edgar Eger to Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
Why do you do that?
You know, because these books really come out of my reading, like the fairy tales, the fables, and the Time Warp come out of how much I love to read history. So I love to plug my favorite books. So that one Time Warp adventure is Summer Reading is Killing Me. Did you guys see that one? That's the one where they have to go back and the evil teddy bear is changing all the stories. And he's got all the bad guys beating up all the characters who are the good guys. And actually, I just wanted to have somebody like Frankenstein have Winnie the Pooh in a headlock. I just thought that would be a nice moment. It's like, come on, Winnie.
Frankenstein can't even walk either.
And that's kind of a mix of like coming from my family wrestling and then thinking like, yeah, what would happen if like Winnie the Pooh got smacked down?
That'd be funny.
Because then also people, you have to know like who Winnie the Pooh is. And you have to know Frankenstein. And you have to know both of those guys to get the joke. Because so you guys got the joke because you know like who those characters are. So I was hoping just to inspire kids too to go maybe find some of the jokes they didn't get.
Yeah, that's neat. Darren?
A lot of your books have been done with Lane Smith. Tell us how you guys met and how you worked together.
Yeah, Lane and I have known each other for probably almost 20 years now. Because I first met him when I was living in New York. I had written a couple stories, and I was looking, actually I hadn't published any yet, and I was taking my stories around to publishers. In fact, The True Story of the Three Little Pigs was the first one, and I'd take it to publishers and they'd go, oh, this is too weird. We're not going to publish this. And I was showing them some Stinky Cheese stories, and then I'd get a letter back in the mail that'd say, these are very weird. Don't ever send us anything again. But I showed the stories to Lane, and he really liked them. So he said, you know what, maybe I'll do up some drawings. And that's kind of unusual. Like usually the artist doesn't know the writer. But we came with the Three Little Pigs all put together and finally got someone to take it. And now it sold something like 4 million books.
Wow.
So once we were successful, people said, oh, we like the stuff you guys do. Let's try some more.
It's interesting. A lot of your books, like The Three Little Pigs and Science Verse and Math Curse, they look like picture books, but they're, and I think people think that they're for young kids.
Yeah,
But they're really not, because they presume knowledge, like you suggested
Absolutely.
before.
Yep.
And so how do we overcome that whole bias? And could you demonstrate, where's Science Verse? Oh, you've got it, Darren.
Oh yeah, Darren's got Science
And could you show us how you need some background knowledge to understand?
Yeah, you know, this is actually a perfect example, and it's so great to have like Nathan and Darren, who are 8th graders, and these guys know the picture books and use them and really enjoy them because they get, I think you guys understand way more than like a kindergartner would. So like if a kindergartner reads these stories, they might think it's funny, like just to hear the word Stinky Cheese Man. They might just laugh at the word stinky, but they don't know the story of the gingerbread man, so they don't think it's as funny as you guys do. Or for something like Science Verse, because what I like to do, I like to take an old story and put a twist on it. And it's called either parody or satire sometimes. So for something like Science Verse, I decided to take famous old poems and actually twist them around a little bit. Oh, how about some nursery rhymes? Because everybody knows nursery rhymes, right?
Yeah.
But if they were written by scientists, they might be a little different. They might go something like this. In fact, maybe this is why scientists don't write nursery rhymes. Because then they would go like, Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. Jack jump over the combustion reaction of O2 plus heat plus fuel to form CO2 plus light plus heat plus exhaust.
Wow.
Well, exactly. Come on, scientists. Or what if a scientist who would know about things like tapeworms wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb? Wouldn't that be appetizing? Then it might sound like this. Mary had a little worm. She thought it was a chigger, but everything that Mary ate only made it bigger. It came with her to school one day and gave the kids a fright, especially when the teacher said, "Now that's a parasite."
That's also wonderfully gross.
And wonderfully disgusting.
Yeah, it is.
And actually that came from like being a kid. I liked to read Mad Magazine when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And they did parodies all the time. Or here's like something my mom used to say when she would tuck us in. Did your mom or your grandma or aunt ever say, like, good night, sleep tight?
Don't let the big bugs bite.
Yeah.
Yes.
I always
all the
thought
time.
that was demented. Like, why did my mom say that and then turn off the lights and close the door? Because my brother and I were going, oh no, are they
She
going to
would.
come and get us?
Like the bed bugs, they're gonna come eat us.
Yeah, and then we'd be freaked out. So I thought if it was a scientist, they would know exactly about all these bugs, and they would write the rhyme like this. Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bed bug, tick, or louse suck blood from you, hatch its eggs on you, then develop the larva, all right? Now you really want to go to sleep, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of
No, you-
exaggeration.
A little bit of
Like,
exaggeration. Yeah.
And now I know why scientists don't write nursery rhymes.
Exactly right.
But you also take aim at more traditional, well-known poems in this collection.
I love making fun of well-known poems.
Well, you know, you made fun of a poem that I love to hate, Joyce Kilmer's Trees. I was forced to memorize that as a kid.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think your version, lovely, is much more lovely.
Oh yeah, you know, and people, I think a lot of people have heard of that poem, Trees, and I don't think they knew even where it came from. It was like that one that starts, I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. Well, in this version, if you were a scientist, you would probably write it like this. Lovely. I think that I ain't never seen a poem ugly as a spleen. A poem that could make you shiver like 3.5 pounds of liver, which is the weight of an average human liver. A poem to make you lose your lunch, tie your intestines in a bunch. A poem all gray, wet and swollen, like a stomach or a colon. Something like your kidney, lung, pancreas, bladder, even tongue. Why you turning green, good buddy? It's just human body study.
It's deliciously gross.
See, I think everyone should have to memorize lovely poems like that.
I agree. It's much better than Joyce Kilmer's. Before we continue, I'd like to invite the viewing audience to begin sending their questions to us. The phone number and email address are on your screen. We'd love to hear from you. We have a call now from Wisconsin. It's Caitlin from Thomas Jefferson Middle School. Caitlin, go ahead.
How did you get ordinary fairy tales to turn into something really funny? What gave you the idea?
Oh, she wondered, like, what did I do with ordinary fairy tales to turn them funny? I think I just love fairy tales so much that I thought it would be even funnier to mess them around and do something new with them. So I either make someone else tell them, or I tell them backwards, or I cut them all up and put them all together. But I just think they're great, funny stories to start with. That's a great question, though.
Yeah, it is. Well, the other thing you switch around, you retell fables, and you do it in heavily illustrated format. You give new names to bad behavior, and you know, and you add fresh fresh morals.
Fresh, lovely morals,
Yeah,
yes.
with nuggets of truth among the
Yeah.
peculiarity of them.
You say peculiarity in a good way, though, right?
Well, yeah. But being a squid after reading one of these tales might just be taken for an insult.
It might be.
Yeah. Could you read
Oh, sure.
the
sure.
story that would explain why that's true?
Well, this was a book that I did to use that form, like you said, of fairy tales, but this time I took fables and kind of messed them around. Did you guys ever read those fables like Aesop tells about, like the tortoise and the hare was one of his?
Yeah.
Like slow and then there's a moral at the end, like slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah.
But this guy Aesop actually lived in this time where he was making fun of the people who were in charge of the town where he lived. But he knew he'd get in trouble if he made fun of them directly, so he would change their names. So instead of writing a terrible story about Darren and Nathan, he would change them into like Blowfish and Squid. Well, I guess he wouldn't use Blowfish and Squid. I would use that. But if I was going to tell like a really nasty story about Darren and Nathan, I wouldn't want them to know about it. So I would change their names. And in fact, don't tell anyone, but this story is based on my daughter and a bunch of her friends.
Oh.
And I just completely stole the story she told me one day and changed all her friends into like deer, mouse, rabbit, and squid. And then the story would go like this. Deer, mouse, rabbit, and squid sat on the steps trying to decide what to do. Hey, let's go see a movie, said Deer. Great, said Mouse. Great, said Rabbit. Oh, there's nothing good on, said Squid. Let's play Frisbee in the park then, said Mouse. Great, said Rabbit. Great, said Deer. Oh, my tentacles are too tired, said Squid. Well, then let's go shopping, said Rabbit. Great, said Deer. Great, said Mouse. That's so boring, said Squid. I'm just going to go home. And she oozed off down the street. Deer, Mouse, and Rabbit looked at each other. Great, they said. And they went off to see a movie, play Frisbee in the park, and go shopping. And the moral of the story is, squids will be squids.
And I never want to be called a squid, ever.
So yeah, there are some fun characters in this book. There's like piece of toast and Fruit Loops. Anybody can be a character. Hand, foot, and tongue. Some of my personal favorites.
Wow.
You never know what they might tell as a story, huh?
Yeah. We have an email. The questioner asks, it seems you're a kid at heart. How are you able to relate to kids? Excuse me.
You know, I think it came from teaching kids for a long time. I taught in New York from first grade up through 8th grade. And actually, I really enjoyed hanging out with the second graders, who are very funny. 5th graders are a little weird. I was with them for a while. But then again, like the 7th and 8th graders, I thought were the entertaining kids because they're such a good audience. Like, I love how you guys know so much stuff about the Time Warp, or you know the picture books, you kind of know what's going on with the jokes. So I think they're my best audience. That's why I just sort of like keep coming back to these guys as the perfect audience.
Okay. We have a phone call from Thomas Jefferson Middle School in Wisconsin, in Fort Washington, Wisconsin. Caller, go ahead.
How many books did he write?
How many books have you written?
Whoa, probably 312.
And how many have been published?
Well, oh, shoot, you got me. I think probably 25 or 6 or 7 of them have been published. Because there's 16 Time Warps and probably, maybe 10 picture books with the new one coming out. And that's actually a thing to know, too. Like, a lot of stories never make it to being a book like this. You might work on one and you think it's funny, but it's really not.
Yeah.
Some of those, actually, I'm glad didn't get published because they weren't that funny when I look back at them now. But I like the ones that finally made it.
That's good.
Did you choose the illustrated format?
Yeah, you know what? It's kind of a funny thing. I both kind of chose it and then fell into it because I first published books when I was teaching 2nd grade. So I read a lot of picture books to my kids then. And I like to write really short stories. But it's hard to publish a short story. There's not many publishers who will take a story and then turn it into a whole book. So the picture book is kind of the perfect thing. It's both of those. It's kind of short stories, and then there's pictures to go with it.
But don't you think it makes it look like it's for younger children, or don't you think adults frequently see it like that?
Yeah, you know what? I think that's kind of a problem where adults see picture books as something just for little kids. Well, because that's like the same as when I was growing up. Picture books were just for the little kids, because it was Dr. Seuss, or there was Mike Mulligan and the Steam Shovel, or Curious George. They were for younger kids. But once we started, we realized like high schoolers, college-age kids, 8th graders, everybody can really like get something more out of an illustrated book.
Well, graphic novels, really,
Perfect example.
are
Yep.
for older readers.
Yep.
And even adults. I think that whole genre came out of the comic book tradition, and it really was for grown-ups.
Yeah.
And that's one of the hottest parts of the field of publishing these days.
Yeah, yeah.
How do illustrated books like yours fit on a continuum, you know, with
Yeah.
graphic novels? And
You know what? I think they're starting to really fit into that, where people are recognizing, like Darren and Nathan's teacher, who uses picture books
Yeah.
with 8th graders, which is spectacular. Like, I think that would have been unheard of 5 years ago. People would have just thought, like, that's crazy, that's for little kids.
Yeah.
But I think they've realized, like, hey, yeah, you know what? A lot of information can come in a picture. Though we have to overcome that, because at one point, like when I was growing up with comic books, they thought those were actually evil. Like they would make you a bad person. They were banned for a while in the 50s. But I think we've grown so far, we're kind of more, these guys are incredibly visually literate, because you guys play games and you've probably seen more television than, or just more images, like books and movies and things, than we ever did.
I personally think the beauty of a book is that it's a static image. It doesn't move all over the place.
Yeah.
And you can actually look at it long
And
enough.
study it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And I think
That's true, and in books like this, it really rewards you if you look closely and you realize, like, oh, there's another little joke in there.
Exactly,
That's
and
hidden in the picture.
but you have to know what to look for, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure we ever slow down long enough to really take a look at
Once they watch this program, everyone will know.
yeah, that's true.
The
That's
secret
true.
will be out.
Why don't people take books with illustration more seriously?
Oh, that's a great question. You know what? I think it is part of that. They still remember them as baby books and comic books too, which they think like that can't be real storytelling. But now, you know what? I think the more and more people start to read stuff like this, they'll find out that you can tell stories with pictures. And then I think they will be more popular.
Well, you know, it also occurs to me that people don't take humor very seriously either. and your
Which is
book-
a funny notion.
yeah, it's true. But why? You know, what's wrong with humor?
You know what? It's a similar thing to pictures. Like, people don't trust a book that's funny. And I know that's a problem for you guys, because I know when I was growing up, I loved funny books. But I never got to read those in school. It was like we never had a required reading book that was funny. They were either just all really dull, it seemed like, or some of them were just sad. It's like the story would start out about, oh, here's a dog who lost his leg. Just like, oh, I'm gonna cry now. What's wrong with a funny book? But people don't trust humor. They think it's not okay. Well, it's even like the Oscars, where Jack Black and Will Ferrell, they did this hilarious song about never winning Oscars if you're gonna do funny movies. And it was a hilarious song, but was absolutely true. And then you look at all the movies that won Oscars, not a funny one there. I guess Talladega Nights is not gonna get any big Oscars, huh?
Do you think books with lots of illustration would be funnier?
Yeah, you know what? I think illustration almost adds a whole other piece of funny that isn't there in the text. Say, for instance, like the true story of the 3 little pigs. Oh, actually, that's on the bottom. I think we can dig them out
Got
here.
it.
Because in the text, I just kind of mention, I sort of say, like, you know, don't blame wolves just because we eat bunnies and sheeps and pigs. Like, if sheep were cheeseburgers, like, they would think you were big and bad. So Lane picked up on that, just that single word cheeseburger, and he makes this great cheeseburger. But inside, if you look closely, there's little bunny ears in it, and there's like a rat tail sticking out. and a mouse nose, yeah, and somebody's little feet, which is just perfect because it's not, that joke is not actually in the text, but all that stuff, the little yellow sauce, whatever that is, dripping down there.
Oh, yeah.
Special secret sauce, I guess. But yeah, so I think illustrated books can be even funnier.
Well, why did you make a conscious decision to write for younger readers, and particularly write for boys?
Oh, you know what? I think because a younger audience is such a good audience, because I started out originally writing for adults. I actually got a master's in fiction writing at Columbia University, so I can legally change stories. No, but I got out of that and painted apartments because, like, you can't really write short, funny things too often. It doesn't have much of an audience. Then I found out how funny kids are and started writing for them. And you know what? And I don't write really specifically for boys, but having been a boy myself and having grown up with all those brothers who are uglier than me, and they're not as nice as me. I'm the best one. But growing up with all those guys, I just naturally write stuff that guys like. It's just sort of, it's the stuff like that Darren and Nathan and I were laughing about. It's just like how we think. Like we think that would be funny to pick up a dirt clod and throw it at somebody. Or to tie some doors together so brothers might not be able to get out.
But you started a website called guysread.com, which is targeting boy readers. Why'd you start that then?
Well, not so much targeting boy readers, but when I was a teacher in school, and being in the children's book writing business, I discovered that boys were not being served. We were missing what boys enjoy reading. The stuff I enjoy, like humor writing or nonfiction, some of the stuff we talked about, like what we're interested in reading, like that's not required reading in schools a lot of times.
Yeah.
So boys get this feeling, and the statistics for boys in reading are horrible. And it's all about like tests and stuff, and I hate that testing kind of stuff. I wanted to find books that like these guys would like to read. So someone would send in a recommendation and just say, I liked reading this book, you might like it too. And not make, required reading for everyone, and not to write specifically for boys, but to find those things that boys enjoy, and maybe make a broader range of stuff available for boys, like graphic novels and comic books. That's another thing.
Interesting.
But I figured we needed a campaign to really make people aware of this and get people talking about it anyhow.
Yeah. We have a caller from Booker T. Washington High School in Norfolk, Virginia. Go ahead, caller.
Hello. Yes. I was just wondering, how do you keep kids motivated to read your book continuously?
Oh, that's a great question. And in fact, that's the challenge of being an author. You want to really engage your audience. You want to make sure they want to read that next page. And you know what? I think back to when I was teaching, and I try to think of like what would reach those kids in the back of the room who are just starting to fall asleep. Like, have you guys ever been in a class where you're just kind of going like, oh, I think I'm just fading out?
Every day. Every day.
Yeah, and that
Teachers can hear this.
Uh-oh.
No, they can't.
But that used to happen to me too. And so I try to write my books where it's like a gripper. It's like that cliffhanger. If you start out with a line like, there was a man made out of really bad smelling cheese, then the kids in the back wake up and go like, what? What did he say? Did he say that? Or that there's a guy in the Timewarp named like, oh, what a butt.
So what are you working on now?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Actually, here's a new thing. Mr. Lane Smith and I are working on this book called Cowboy and Octopus.
Can I ask these guys if they remember Frog and Toad or George and Martha from when you were little guys?
George and Martha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those were some of my favorites of the two hippos who are they're just good friends. And the same with Frog and Toad, like they were great friends. So I thought, hey, I would love to write stories like that about two best friends. Except then I thought to make it the Scieszka twist, they should be really weird things like Cowboy and Octopus. So that became the whole book. And I asked Lane to then make like one character always stay the same, Cowboy, and to have the octopus always stay the same too. So these guys, through all these illustrations, and this is what the book looks like before it gets published. It's just in this kind of floppy form, so we can see if the colors are right. So here, let me read you one of the stories from here. Because Cowboy's kind of, I don't know, I guess you'd say he's not that sharp. Here's one called, oh, thanks, Help. An octopus needs some help. He's working on this project where he's putting a boat together. So Octopus needs help. So he calls his friend Cowboy. I have to hold all these pieces in, stick this in here, stick that in here, and stick that in here. So I'll do that, and when I nod my head, you hit it, okay? Sounds loco to me, says Cowboy, but okay. So Octopus holds everything together. Octopus nods his head, and bam! Cowboy hits it. Need any more help, says Cowboy. No, says Octopus. Sometimes help from a friend isn't the best help.
So that's what John is working on now. We have an email from Northtown Elementary in Columbus, Ohio. The questioner wants to know, can you make up stories really fast? Could you make up one now?
Sure. Ready? Oh, about anything in particular?
No.
Oh, I don't even get a subject? Yeah, once upon a time there was two guys. One guy was named Darren, and one guy was named Nathan. And then they got into this big fight where they tied their doorknobs together, and they started pulling them, and they didn't know they were each in the door, so they pulled them back and forth, and then they both got run over by a truck. The end.
That's fast.
How's that?
Hey, there you go.
That's a special writer trick you might want to learn. Like if you don't know what to do at the end, have everyone get run over by a truck.
We have an email from Kevin in St. Lucie, Florida. What's your favorite book of all time?
Whoa. That's a tough question, because I have like a bazillion favorite books. But you know what? I'd have to say Go Dog Go.
Really?
Which is the weirdest book. Have you guys ever read Go Dog Go?
I've heard of it, though.
Like all these different colored dogs get in cars and drive around. It's a book I read as a little
is it
kid.
by Dr. Seuss?
A guy like Dr. Seuss, P.D. Eastman. But
Yeah,
they look like
I've read
those.
it. I've
Yep.
read it.
And they drive around. He asks, do you like my party hat? And then all the dogs go up in a tree and have a party. That's the end. That's maybe where I got some of my sense of humor, too. Got twisted early on.
Why did you decide to write full-time?
You know, it kind of came out of teaching. I was teaching, also painting apartments. And when I was crawling around on people's bathroom floors, painting oil paint in the middle of the summer, I thought, I would really love to do something different. And I always loved writing. I was always hoping that I could be a writer. Though I didn't even know that was a job. I didn't know that that
Really?
was such a thing.
Do the students you meet from across the country ever think about writing full-time
Yeah.
or illustrating?
Well, yeah, I think that's an interesting change from when I grew up. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a writer. But you guys have this great advantage, I think, where you've seen that there are different writers, different kind of illustrators, or you even realize like you could do this as a full-time job.
It's true.
I never thought that was possible. I didn't even know that such a thing existed.
It's true.
So I think that's a good reason to even have a great show like this,
Yeah.
where we can show kids like, you can be a writer, you can be an illustrator, you can actually draw things as a job. How great would that be?
Okay, we have one more email from Mrs. Garofalo's class. Forgive me, Mrs. Garofalo, if I messed up your name. From Port St. Lucie, Florida. Have you ever written a serious book, even if it hasn't been published? And please answer that quickly. We're running out of time.
Yes, I've written some really funny ones I thought were funny, but they really weren't.
Oh, so that was a serious book. Oh, well, there you go. You sometimes insert yourself, by the way. Dr. Jono's Bad Breath.
Yeah, that's in 2095. That's in Nathan's
yeah.
book. Yeah, yeah. And I think I put Lane in there as like some toilet paper special.
Yeah, I think so too.
That was just kind of a little trick I planted in there, just to see if anyone would find
So
it.
you want to check and see how careful your readers read.
Exactly.
Okay.
Could be there. Anything could be in there.
Well, we've run out of time, Mr. Scieszka. Many thanks for being with us today. A special thanks to my co-hosts, Darren Montgomery and Nathan Karchner.
Absolutely.
Thanks
you
to
guys
their
did a great job.
Thanks too to their extraordinary teacher, Edie Covington, and the entire staff from Lake Ridge Middle School in Woodbridge, Virginia.
Yes.
If you didn't get a chance to ask a question today, you can contact us by using the email address on the screen. We'd love to hear from you and answer your questions. We'd also like to invite you to visit the Kennedy Center website at the addresses on the screen. There, you'll find additional information about this program and the Kennedy Center's upcoming programs, as well as other resources on integrating the arts into the curriculum. Don't miss our next program on Tuesday, March 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, featuring Imani Wins in A Musical Journey. We'd like to thank you all for being with us and for contributing your questions either by email or by phone. We're going to close with Jon Scieszka reading from Science Verse. And, I don't have
nice.
Science
I've
Verse.
got that.
Okay.
Oh, this would be a lovely little something to leave you with. It's sort of like Lewis Carroll's poem Jabberwocky, except I wrote this poem by taking all the ingredients off the back of a marshmallow bag and Oreos box. It's called Gobblegooky. 'Twas fructose and the vitamins did zinc and dye red number 8. All poly were the thiamines and the carbohydrate. Beware the gobblegook, my son, the flavorings, the added C. Beware the serving size and shun the dreaded BHT. And as in frolic thought I stood, the gobblegook with eyes nitrate came gluten through the dextrose wood, its extracts carbonate. Oh, can you slay the gobblegook, polyunsaturated boy? 3,000 calories, don't look, the sugars.